Otherwise, turning cloudier from the northwest. Temperatures in most places not far from average, but it does turn breezy. In fact, it turns increasingly windy in the north and northwest of Scotland as heavy rain moves in here. And that heavy rain persistent across the northwest Highlands overnight tonight. It will add to about 80 millimetres in some of the wetter spots. Damp for some western hills and coasts elsewhere as the cloud thickens and lowers overnight. But because of the cloud, because of the breeze tonight, well, it's going to be a frost and fog-free start to the weekend. But it will be a grey start with a lot of cloud in the sky. Quite breezy through the day, wet and windy for Scotland, Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England, as this lively feature sinks south, bringing a spell of really quite gusty winds as it pushes through. And then blustery but bright for the northern half of the country, with showers following the main area of rain and cloud. But it stays cloudy in the south, but much milder, 12 or 13 Celsius here. A windy day then to come on Saturday, and wind stays the theme through the next few days. Sunday starts off relatively calm, but it turns increasingly windy, especially in the north later on.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, happy Friday everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Falarineman on your TV and on your radio all the way through until midday. And it's a bumper final show of the week today, ladies and gentlemen. There's just been a massive development when it comes to Partygate. Also, the care home crisis looks to be now over. It looks like we are properly out of this pandemic. We've got all that and much more.
Absolutely. Well, make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting through all of those throughout the show. But first, as usual, here's the latest news.
Good morning. It's 10:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Met Police have asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the Downing Street events it's investigating. The highly anticipated report into alleged parties during lockdown is yet to be published. Its findings could potentially trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The force isn't calling for any delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in its investigation. Scotland's Secretary of State Ian Murray told GB News it's hard to keep up with Boris Johnson's version of events.
calls into question the Prime Minister in terms of the ministerial code and lying to Parliament. And the very fact the Metropolitan Police are talking about 8 parties. The Prime Minister said there were no parties, then he said he didn't attend parties, then he said he didn't think they were parties but work events, and now we're up to the latest excuse of the Prime Minister being ambushed by his own birthday cake. It's become farcical, and it would be like a funny play if it wasn't so serious for the country.
The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering its delay. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be dropped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Number 10 says there are no plans to scrap the rise. US President Joe Biden has warned there's a distinct possibility Russia might invade Ukraine next month. It follows a build-up of tens of thousands of Russian troops on Ukraine's borders in recent weeks, which has stoked fears of an invasion. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has denied any plans of attack. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following so-called malicious online attacks in Ukraine. The National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. No current threats have been identified in the UK, but guidance has been updated to ensure businesses stay ahead of potential threats. The Foreign Secretary has defended her decision to use a private plane to fly to Australia, which reportedly cost taxpayers around £500,000. Liz Truss says the government plane is there for making travelling easier for ministers, with the Foreign Office adding the trip was within the rules set by the ministerial code. Critics say it was a grotesque misuse of public money. The UK has pledged a further £97 million of emergency aid for Afghanistan. That's after the government promised to double financial support following the Taliban's takeover last summer. It brings the total to £286 million this financial year. The money's being used to buy food, water and sanitation facilities. COVID restrictions have been eased in Wales. The rule of 6 has been scrapped. People no longer have to social distance and nightclubs can now reopen. COVID passes will still be required in cinemas, theatres and concert halls. Working from home remains part of the advice but will no longer be a legal requirement. Nearly 50,000 people have now signed a petition to stop a driver from being charged with murder. The man known as Abraham reportedly tried to stop a stabbing in West London by driving into the attacker. He was arrested and has been released on bail while police continue their investigation. The driver's lawyer, Mohammed Akunji, told GB News his client's actions go beyond everyday bravery.
Well, it makes him a person who was acting fully in accordance with the law, which was in the self-defence of another, in fact, others. And we say that's quite squarely and quite obviously a person who's a hero, who's put himself in between harm's way, somebody who is effecting a savage attack on people. And he put himself between that person and innocent people.
Over 200 post offices have closed in the last 2 years. That's the equivalent of 2 a week. The research from Citizens Advice found that more than 1,000 stores in the UK are deemed temporarily closed, but have actually been shut for more than 2 years. The Post Office says it doesn't think the report reflects the almost 12,000 branches that have been stable for a decade. The government's pledging to make British Sign Language a recognised language. It's hoped a new bill will improve access for deaf people and promote its use during public announcements. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick and Anaya and To The Point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren, and I'm Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio. We've got a show full of all of the big stories and lots of discussion that you care about, so here's what's on the menu.
COVID restrictions on adult social care will be eased in England from Monday. But how much damage has already been done to families throughout this pandemic? Get in touch with your stories, if indeed you have any. I think there's a lot of very unforgivable things that went on in the care home sector.
Prince Andrew has filed his defences and answers to the Virginia Gifford lawsuit against him. But has the damage already proved too much for the Duke of York?
And it's Brits on ice. Yes, that's right. We'll get the latest on some of the younger skaters who'll be watching Team GB closely as they head to China for the Winter Olympics. I actually went to that ice rink once to have a go at ice hockey and got absolutely battered.
Well, we have all that and much more coming up in the programme, so get in touch with your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views.
The single biggest sign that we're out of this pandemic, and that it's getting over actually, is the relaxation of care home rules. The care home situation was absolutely shocking. It was one of the most vividly awful parts of the COVID crisis. What happened was unforgivable. Firstly, NHS patients who had been diagnosed with COVID were knowingly sent back into care homes, sometimes not even their own care homes, right, which meant that it ripped through the care system. At the very height of the pandemic, 1 in 4 care home deaths in England and Wales involved COVID. It seemed to me that the elderly were hung out to dry, or indeed died. They were treated as people who were probably on the way out anyway, so what's the point of preserving them, eh? But I don't think it was just the actual lives of care home residents that were completely cast aside. It was their mental well-being. It was the humanity of it all, and frankly, the lack of common sense. One of my friend's fathers was given a year to live at the start of the pandemic. Unfortunately, he died in just 10 months, and my mate wasn't allowed to go and see him. As things reached the end stage, he begged to be allowed to see his father just one last time. He tested negative for COVID, his dad tested negative for COVID, but no, it wasn't allowed. His dad died alone. What was the point of that? A man with terminal cancer, days left to live, testing negative for COVID, not being able to see his son in his final moments. The fact is that I think the vast majority of people in care homes would have rather died from COVID than not seen their families for 18 months. In September 2021, Lynn Hughes was finally able to hug her mum for the first time, nearly 2 years after seeing her through panes of glass outside a care home, across lawns and behind acrylic screens in sealed pods. Tragically, that final hug was when Lynn's mum was dead in her coffin. It made me feel physically sick to see the harrowing images and videos of people with senile dementia in the very late stages of it as well, unable to comprehend what was going on, hammering at the glass windows as their crying relatives waved at them. That ridiculous long rubber glove thing that people could stick their hands in to touch their grandparents. One woman was arrested for taking her mum out of a care home so she could look after her herself in a more COVID-secure environment, i.e. her own home. Basically, she realised that her mum was more likely to survive in her house than in the care home. Police chased them, pulled them into a service station after they drove off and arrested the daughter and then returned the mum to the care home. It was totally inhumane. Now, 90% of care home residents have had this booster jab. There is a more dominant but thankfully milder variant on the loose at the moment. We've got adequate PPE. So COVID restrictions in care homes are now being relaxed in England from Monday. And from February the 16th, care home workers will be asked to take a lateral flow COVID test before every shift, rather than the current system of weekly PCR tests alongside lateral flow tests 3 times a week. This is good. This is learning to live with COVID, isn't it? I don't want to live in a country where the second somebody goes into a care home, you know that you'll only be able to see them again in full protective gear, and that the second there's a new scariant in town, the care home shuts its doors. The priorities of people in the media and politics are, yet again, all wrong. Oh, let's get obsessed with these parties, shall we? Tens of thousands of this country's most vulnerable people died alone. Where's the Sue Gray report into that? I'll just finish by saying something again that people may find controversial, don't get me wrong, but I honestly think most terminally ill people would rather have died of the coronavirus than live out their final days alone with no family by their side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you express very strong and powerful words that I think many people would resonate with. I mean, one of the things that came to mind with me was that in the beginning of the lockdown, February 2020, I think in the clamour of just shutting the entire country down, there was almost a forgetting of the most vulnerable, the people that were most at risk of getting seriously ill or dying, and we had the most horrendous situation go on in care homes. I don't think that we've really confronted that as a society, and I don't think more broadly we've had a real reckoning and confrontation of the trauma that happened during that time. And actually, everyone has a story of pain, of loss, of breakup that perhaps may not have been the case if it wasn't for COVID.
I agree, and I really do think as well, a lot of elderly people already suffer from loneliness, don't they? They already suffer from a lot of depression sometimes as well. And, that thought really of essentially shutting them away in their rooms, maybe them allowing them out just to look through a window at one of their grandchildren or something for 10 minutes. Really, I found that absolutely harrowing. I could understand it in terms of stopping the spread of it, but especially when someone was terminally ill, and they've realistically, they've got weeks left to live anyway. Yeah. What's the point? What's the point of just shutting them in their room?
And I think you mentioned Partygate there, and I think I've definitely got to the point that you have, that I just think that this has got way out of hand. But then the other part of me, on a contrast to what you said, makes me think, well, this is why this has caused so much pain to people, that they are reminded. It's almost a kind of cathartic experience based on all of the challenge and trauma that people went through, that actually the Partygate comes to represent a sense of guilt, pain, frustration. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And also there is some kind of very new developments on Partygate that we're going to be revealing to you as well throughout the course of the show. Interesting as well, because it kind of might suck the life out of it a bit. I mean, one of them has just come to light in the last few minutes, for example, is that actually it was reported, pretty much this birthday party was reported in the Times at the time, and no one seemed to care. So all of a sudden we're taking the moral high ground, are we? But anyway, there we go.
Yes, well, joining us now to look at the situation for both visitors and those in care is Nadia Ahmed Obi, Executive Chair of the National Care Association. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I mean, what do you make of the possible easing of restrictions in care home? Is it too soon, or is it a welcome move?
Good morning. Well, I think it had to happen. There's an inevitability that we've got to get back to some form of normality as soon as we possibly can. So I think any time might feel like it's too soon, but we as a sector will move towards it because that's the guidance that's going to be provided. And we've always worked with any guidance that comes through because that's all we can do. It does come at a time where we still have chronic staffing shortages and the virus is out there. So the IPC measures, which is the prevention control measures in care services, will just need to continue to be much, much stronger as much as we possibly can. And that depends on also the masks that we're given, that they're the right quality. So we can keep our residents safe, we can keep our staff safe, but we can also keep the visitors safe.
Do you have some, experiences really of relatives there essentially begging to be allowed to see their other relatives in their dying moments? It must have been very difficult for the care workers to say no to that, as well as obviously for the families involved.
Well, end-of-life care has always been within the guidance to be facilitated, except in the very early stages where everything was a bit chaotic and nobody had thought about what was going to happen in social care settings. So there was a blanket that was brought out by government. But since then, we have always maintained that end-of-life is something that should be facilitated for families to attend and to be able to do that safely, because that is a challenge. It's an enormous challenge. The same thing happened in hospitals where people were not allowed to go in. But we know more now and we're mitigating that. Very difficult for staff. We had staff trying to do things that should have been done by professionals. But of course, the primary care services all shut down. There was no CQC around to support the sector. We were pretty much left on our own. And our staff were being asked to deliver services that actually they weren't trained up for, and they were being told how to do it through videos and things, which was appalling. And the harrowing stories from some of our staff members who who used to watch that and didn't know what to do, because we didn't have ventilators in our hospital. We didn't have oxygen available in residential settings. Those were harrowing moments. And we know a lot of staff that actually left because of that, because it was just too traumatic to live through that. So the trauma for our teams, as well as for the residents' families who were not able to be there, but maybe had to watch it on a video, it's dreadful. There's no doubt about it.
No, there isn't. And I think I've got a lot of people emailing in just right in front of me now saying, well, look, hey, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And I certainly was not talking about in my opening address, necessarily right at the very start where it was all chaotic and, we didn't know, frankly, how bad this thing was going to be. It was more, for me, those images of, frankly, not that long ago, maybe about 6 months ago, of people still kind of not being able to go and take their parents out of care homes, etc., etc., etc. And I think that for me was just completely unforgivable. But what did you make of what happened right at the start when people were being moved into care homes who had COVID? They were being sent into care homes that weren't even necessarily their own care home. I mean, that was devastating, wasn't it?
It was absolutely devastating. It was devastating for the person that was being moved. And we must always remember, at the centre of all this is the individual that this is happening to. For families to suddenly find out their loved one was being moved out, and for the care service who's been told that, there's no need to worry about it. This person doesn't have COVID. They're going to come into your service. You don't need to worry about it. We didn't know about isolation. We didn't have that sort of testing regime out there. And then we didn't have GP support at all, or any support from the NHS. So it was challenging, but we must never forget it was the person who was being moved very, very quickly out of a setting and put into a care home where they didn't know. This was totally alien to them. They couldn't be sent home because there was no staff available to look after them at home. And I think at the centre of all of this is the people that had to go through that.
And Nigel Ahmed, just finally, very quickly, I mean, do you think we're now learning the lessons? I mean, the government has announced that much more is going to be done to deal with the social care crisis and so on. Do you think that we are now learning the lessons?
Well, I think we as a sector are learning the lessons. I think government is full of empty promises, and there's no real plan about fixing social care. This is about stabilising the NHS, so they need to stop using that strap line. And we need to be very clear there's not much funding coming towards us.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, as well, I would hope there's some kind of plan in place to compensate for a lot of the people who are unvaccinated, staff-wise, who are going to, lose their jobs, essentially. Is there?
Well, we don't know at this moment in time, but let's wait and see. If they halt it for the NHS, then we are going to, as social care, be worrying about why we had to go through that. Why were we the guinea pigs? Why were we picked on as a sector that they would try it out on? If they, we have the same staffing crisis, actually more. We had 120,000 vacancies at that time. We lost 40,000. We continue not to be able to take people in. We're being held to ransom by agencies who are charging extortionate rates to bring staff in. It's an enormous challenge for us.
Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Well, look, Nadja, thank you very much. Nadja Ahmed, there, OBE, Executive Chair of the National Care Association. If you are just joining us, the rules for care home visitations are going to be loosened. Is it a sign now that we're well and truly out of this thing?
Well, after the break, has Liz Truss gone too far? Will Boris be finished by next week? Can the police actually take action against Number 10? These are all the questions that we're going to be asking and finding out right after the break.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Morning, everyone. It's 10:22. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Falarineman on GB News. Of course, we're on your TV and your radio as well.
Yes, well, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has defended her use of the government plane costing £500,000 over a commercial flight to Australia. She insists the decision was based on value for money. Here's what she had to say.
I use the government plane. That is why we have a government plane, to enable government ministers to conduct government business, and that's what I flew to Australia in.
Yes, government plane used for government business there, but anyway. Well, in the last hour or so, we've also heard that the Met will ask for minimal reference to be made in the Cabinet Office report for incidents the police are actively investigating. This is, of course, Partygate related. Well, for the latest, we're joined now by GB News' political correspondent Tom Harwood and GB News' home and security editor Mark White. Mark, I'll start with you. What's the significance of this then?
Well, this explains an awful lot, I think, given that my colleagues in Westminster were being briefed quite extensively at the beginning of the week that this report from Sue Gray was ready to go, oven-baked, I think, or oven-ready, to coin a phrase from Boris Johnson there, ready to be sent to Downing Street and then to be also published to the wider world. The Met, we were told, I was being briefed at the time, had no objection to this, and they were not calling for Sue Gray's report to be delayed. But here we have it now, a few days on, and the Met saying that they have indeed asked for limitations in Sue Gray's report on the issues that they're investigating. Now, we understand it to be about 8 events or parties, whatever you want to call them, that are being investigated by the Met. So that is a considerable number, and potentially the pertinent ones as far as Sue Gray is concerned as well, the ones that she has highlighted perhaps as indicating wrongdoing and breaches of COVID rules. So the poor woman clearly has just been frantically trying to either redact pages or rewrite pages, probably deciding, look, do we actually publish it at this point, or do we wait for the Met? Is it worth it, given that so much of it, it seems, is going to have to be rewritten or redacted?
Yeah, Mark, I'll come back to you on this one, but Tom, just to bring you in, what could be the political ramifications for this? I mean, is this Boris yet again proving to be somewhat Teflon? What do we think?
Well, Boris is certainly going to be breathing a sigh of relief, because this creates a certain element of uncertainty. We were expecting Sue Gray's report to be being published early next week, whereas now we're not sure that it'll be published in any form before this police investigation. If I were Sue Gray, I'd be thinking, hang on, should half this report be stripped out and we present this sort of limp version of it before the Prime Minister, who then takes it to Parliament, but it's not the whole truth, it's not the full truth, it leaves out some crucial elements there? Or do we hold it back? Do we wait until the police investigation's done before the full report can come out? That's a difficult question to weigh up. And of course, the political ramification of publishing a report that is substantially reduced in its form, that has these 8 events no longer in it or only mentioned in passing, that raises questions of legitimacy of that report. It muddies all of the waters within Parliament. It no longer in many ways becomes that watershed moment that we were perhaps expecting, that moment where all MPs can say, right, all the facts are on the table now, I have to make up my mind, does my letter go into Sir Graham Brady or not? Now it becomes more of an open question, and that potentially makes Boris Johnson's position a little bit safer.
Yeah. Mark, can I just ask, so let's say this Sue Gray report doesn't see the light of day, or they don't publish any of it, or a very redacted version, whatever, and then the Met do their investigation. I don't know how long that might take, but then the Met, are they under any compulsion to reveal the results of that? So if they decide not to prosecute, for example, we might just never find out what was happening, is that right?
Well, I mean, with regard to the investigation, clearly at the end of the day, if they go down the route towards, and we believe it in the first instance anyway, is likely to be fixed penalty notices, then obviously that is going to come out and that will be talked about. If they investigate and decide that there is actually nothing that crosses the threshold in terms of requiring some kind of criminal sanction, well, then it's up to Sue Gray anyway to highlight those issues and to talk about those in greater depth in her report. But I think the issue for Sue Gray at the moment is that she's been somewhat hobbled by the Met. This is very difficult. And I know there's a school of thought as far as the Prime Minister is concerned that, you know, this gives him some breathing space. But I don't really accept that as potentially the way forward for him, because, I mean, every day that passes, he's getting pummeled with something new. It's like the, you know, death by 1,000 cuts. I'm sure he would just want this as much as everybody else, and certainly our viewers and listeners want this to be over as soon as possible, just to rip that sticking plaster off.
Yeah.
And Tom, the police investigating a current government, I mean, does this make Boris Johnson's position increasingly untenable?
It's a curious position. Of course, the last time the police carried out an investigation of this sort around a Prime Minister was back in 2006. It was Tony Blair over cash for honours. He was questioned 3 times by the police, and many people reason that this was one of the reasons why less than a year later Tony Blair was out as Prime Minister. It certainly raises questions around the authority, potentially weakens the authority of that figure in Downing Street, although there are some caveats around that. If the police conduct this investigation and find that there was no criminality on the part of the Prime Minister, that could potentially strengthen rather than weaken his position. Of course, we're only 2.5 years into his premiership. It's a different dynamic to an investigation that is conducted into a premiership that is 9 years old, as was the case with Tony Blair. But certainly it does give his enemies a stick to beat him with. On the one hand, it buys him time to move the conversation on to other issues, potentially to cancel those tax rises that everyone is so fearful of, potentially to move the conversation on to the economy, where the Conservatives are still marginally having stronger ground, to move the conversation on to foreign affairs, where Britain has actually been playing a stellar role in terms of international leadership over Ukraine. There are some elements of this government's agenda where they can really win on if they can move the conversation there. Does the police investigation buy them time to do so? Perhaps. Or does it just drag this party story on for longer and longer still? Another side, perhaps.
I did see a report that came out actually today that was a little segment, as it were, of something published in the Times, I believe, pretty much the day after this particular Boris Johnson birthday bash, if you can even call it that, I suppose. And people didn't seem to care too much about it then, so it's interesting how that snowballed. We're running out of time before we've got to go to the bulletins, but Tom, government playing news for government business. What's going on?
Well, this is a story that has risen up this morning over Liz Truss taking a government plane to Australia. Now, critics of this say that Liz Truss should have flown on a commercial airliner. That's the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom should have flown using an economy seat to go to one of our strongest allies, someone that we've signed the AUKUS deal with, signed a trade deal with as well. It seems like it's a bit of a curious story. I can't imagine that anyone in America would ever get irritated by the Secretary of State Antony Blinken taking an official government plane to do official government business. It does make me wonder, it does make me worry that we have this mindset of national decline if we think somehow we're the only great power in the world that can't fly our own senior government officials about. They have to take some kind of economy plane. I think that would be a little bit curious and would really be a big step down from the kind of global player we like to see ourselves as.
Well, thank you, Tom Howard, our political correspondent, and Mark White, our home and security editor. Thank you both.
Good stuff. Well, yes, after the break, we'll be taking a deeper dive into the lawsuit that has been filed against Prince Andrew. Is there any way back for the Duke of York? But before that, here's a look at this morning's news.
It's 10:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police have asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the events it's investigating. Her inquiry into alleged Downing Street parties during lockdown was due to be released this week. The force isn't calling for any further delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in the investigation. The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering a U-turn. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be scrapped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Russia says it doesn't want war with Ukraine. The Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, confirmed proposals by the US to ease tensions are still being assessed. He expects to meet the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in the next couple of weeks. The Kremlin also says President Putin will address Russia's security concerns during a phone call with the French president today. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following malicious online attacks in Ukraine. While no current threats have been identified in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. The Foreign Secretary has defended her decision to use a private plane to fly to Australia, which reportedly cost taxpayers around £500,000. Critics say the move was a grotesque misuse of public money. But Liz Truss says the government plane is there to make travelling easier for ministers. COVID restrictions have been lifted in Wales. The rule of six has been scrapped. People no longer have to social distance and nightclubs can now reopen. COVID passes will still be required in cinemas, theatres and concert halls. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. More at the top of the hour.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Morning, everyone. It's 10:36. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Falarin Imam on GB News. We're live on your TV and your radio this morning.
Yes, so a lot of reaction to the monologue.
Yes, indeed.
We're going to be going into Patrick's
delving into the terrifying world of my inbox. Now, earlier on at the start of the show, anyway, I was speaking about the care home, former crisis, I suppose. Now it's the fact that the rules are being relaxed, so visitation rules and testing rules as well in care homes in England from Monday. Lots of people, it's actually split people, this. A lot of people saying, well, hey, look, you know, with hindsight, we didn't really know what was going to happen and we were right to essentially lock people away.
Yes,
but Joe's, sorry, just one quick one.
I was going to read that. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Do it then.
No.
You do it.
Well, Jo said that she agrees with your sentiments about the elderly, but would add that the inhuman, cruel isolation of the elderly from their loved one was absolutely about protecting the rest of society, not about protecting the elderly. It was a decision taken by the younger, fitter, working, contributing members of society to shut away the old and vulnerable in case they infected the rest of us. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. People say, well, why on earth is Patrick ranting on about care homes when the rules have just been relaxed? The only achievement is to upset those families formerly affected. That's from Julie. Well, it's obviously certainly not my intention, Julie. I'm not sure that's exactly what's happening personally, but anyway, I think it's just the fact that if we're talking about cake and Liz Truss getting on a government plane to do government business, could we maybe have a conversation about some of the mistakes that were made? My main point on this is because we're about to come out of it, I'm worried that we'll get a new variant and they'll just go, right, let's just shackle the elderly up again, and we can't do that.
Yes, and Angela Green says, I want my high-ranking ministers to get to their official businesses as well as briefed as fresh as is possible. What sort of country have we turned into if our top royals and top government officials fly on Ryanair?
Fly on Ryanair? I'm not sure Ryanair would have them. Right, a weird Twitter beef with Ryanair at one point. They decided that they took very unkindly to something that I'd said on air and then repeatedly went after me on Twitter. So that was a good one. I suspect it may have been the Ryanair Christmas party, but of course we'll never know. But yes, care homes. Patrick, care homes had many deaths, but the lack of PPE, no lateral flow test in early 2020. Hence the restrictions. Maybe I'm now Captain Hindsight. Goodness me, that's from Dave. Thank you very much, Dave. Well, there you go.
Philip also says that's roughly 30 years' wage for someone on minimum wage. That's in relation to Liz Truss' £500,000, and he's saying just for a private jet to Australia and back, and that's actually 30,000 times the minimum wage.
Yes,
so he thinks it is. Too much money.
Well, it is a lot of money, but I suppose that's the going rate for a private jet. I do wonder if people maybe could be made aware as well. It's worth someone digging into. I imagine journalists across the country are now. I might do it over the weekend, actually. How much does it cost? That's a sad life, isn't it? How much does it cost for the running and the upkeep of government buildings? Because they're being used for government business as well.
Massive refurbishment recently of Parliament and lots of different things.
Yes, and just one last one on the care home stuff before we move on. Dave has been in touch. Thank you, Dave. I was engrossed in what you said, especially about care homes. I felt at the very beginning of the pandemic that the government didn't care about the elderly. And I think that's the point, isn't it, really? For me, it did look like a fundamental lack of care.
No, but I mean, wasn't the lockdown overwhelmingly to protect the elderly and the vulnerable? So I wouldn't go that far to say that they didn't care about the elderly.
No, I think maybe the ones in care homes where I'm sitting, I think the people that were just dying anyway. You know, what's the point of not allowing them to see a loved one? But hey, there we go. A range of views on this. Thank you very much, everybody. Keep them coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Yes. I'm just going to do it now, right? Just say this quickly now to make sure that this happens. To make sure it happens at the end of the show, we have got. At about 11:50, right? A very nice little surprise for you, OK? So now I've said it live on air, they have to make it happen. So there we go. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Anyway.
Indeed.
We'll go on. Moving away. What
yes, well, in other news, with 1 week to go until the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, Team GB athletes are preparing to take part in their events to prove they are really the best in the world. Our South East of England reporter Ellie Costello went to the Riverside ice rink in Chelmsford to speak to some of the younger skaters who will be watching with their families ahead of the Games.
Good morning, I'm here at Riverside Ice Rink today in Chelmsford where there's so much excitement in the rink. It's 1 week to go until the Winter Olympics kick off in Beijing. And look around this ice rink, there are so many young skaters here practicing like they do every single morning. Let's go and chat to one of them now. This is Macy, she's 10 years old. I'm going to try and spin into you, Macy. I might fall over. Woo, here we go. Macy, you are just 10 years old and look at you, you've got a very professional looking outfit on. How long have you been skating for?
3 years.
3 years.
And that includes lockdown.
That includes lockdown, so that's pretty amazing. So what, you weren't skating for about 18 months?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. And you've been to loads of competitions, haven't you, in that time?
Yeah.
Which ones have you been to?
I've been to Skate London, Skate Southern, Young Stars, Tayside, and Oxford.
So loads of competitions. You've probably only been skating for about 18 months. What do you love about skating so much?
Everything, especially spins, jumps and competitions.
Ah, you like all the dangerous stuff. So we are here today, Macy, because it's 1 week to go until the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Are you going to be watching the Winter Olympics? Are you excited?
Yes, I'm very excited to watch the Russians.
The Russians, not Team GB.
And of course, Natasha McKay.
Oh, there you go, there you go. She saved it last minute. And do you want to be in the Olympics one day? Are you hoping maybe in 4 or 8 or 12 years' time this could be you?
Yes.
I think you might have what it takes. Well, let's speak to someone who might know. This is Macy's coach, Chloe. Chloe, I'm going to fall over here, so I'm just going to hang on to you.
Right.
So, what makes a perfect ice skater? What kind of ingredients does a person need?
So you need a bit of elegance, a bit of perseverance and hard work, really. It's quite a tough sport. A lot of ballet involved as well as, sport. Yeah.
And dedication as well. I mean, Macy was here at 6 o'clock this morning. I mean, what kind of hours are we talking about here in a week?
So to get quiet ice, you really do need to get here for 6 o'clock in the morning before school, and then a lot of people train after school as well. So, yeah, a lot of commitment.
Yeah, absolute commitment. So, does Macy have what it takes, do you think?
Absolutely. She's so hardworking. She is here all the time. Tries so hard. I can't ask more of her.
Well, you two are fabulous. Thank you so much for talking to me this morning. And you're going to show me the best of what you've got right now, haven't you? So take it away. So impressive. That is the best of British. I think we're going to be seeing you both at the Olympics very soon. Back to you in the studio.
Well, Ellie, thank you very much. And, you know, those kids were almost as graceful as me on the ice.
Fantastic. They were so good.
Well, anyway, let's give you some stories for a little bit of a roundup, some stories that you might have missed. And so we're going to start in Scotland. Oh, what's going on up there?
Yes, well, the Scottish Government says it wants to reform the Gender Recognition Act to make it easier for people to change their legal gender or legally recognised gender. But the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is an A-star rated globally human rights organisation, urged Holyrood to put the brakes on it, saying further consideration is needed to avoid further damage and division. However, there is backlash as leading LGBT organisation Stonewall said the EHRC was deeply troubled in its approach to trans people's human rights. Now, I'm very worried about this story. I think that what we're seeing is these huge NGOs and lobby groups having so much influence over the public debate. Now, if anybody criticises or wants to raise concerns about things that might slightly, even minutiaely, disagree with anything that they put forward, then they condemn them, they say that they're harming LGBT people, and that's not the case. Actually, women, many LGBT groups as well, ordinary people, religious groups, are criticising making it easier for people to change their gender by mere declaration.
Yeah, I think, I actually do think that this is going to be a massive issue facing our country, frankly, for a very long time to come. And I can see a lot of parents, maybe people of our generation as well, with looking at having children going forward, thinking about, well, hang on a minute, what do I do if I hear that my child comes home and there's been something put in their head, potentially, of something raised with them by someone who's not particularly well trained in this field about whether or not they've been born into the wrong body, etc. I think I'd have a massive problem with that.
Yeah, and now what we're seeing in Scotland and other parts of the country, that is increasingly being allowed for teachers and schools to affirm whether your kid has changed their gender, even without your consent. So if you say, no, you're not born in the wrong body, you know, you are a female, you're a male, and this is how I'm going to raise you. Sometimes now teachers can actually counter that. I mean, it's scary to me.
I think it's terrifying.
It's really scary, and I think that we need some real moral and political leadership on this issue, or I worry about the future?
I do, absolutely. Of course, without wanting to kind of force anyone to live against their will or anything like that. But it's just the idea of maybe being a bit too proactive, potentially, about it. But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, look, Prince Andrew has filed his answer and defences to Virginia Giuffre's sexual abuse lawsuit against him. So, according to those documents, the Duke's lawyers say that Giuffre's complaint should be dismissed because the court lacks subject matter jurisdiction over the action.
Yes, well, Duke has said that several matters lack evidence. He denies the allegations of refusing to cooperate with US authorities and denies sexual abuse of the plaintiff when she was under the age of 18.
With us now to analyse the latest update to the case is Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator and journalist. Richard, just whiz us through your take really on these latest developments. Because does he lack information really, or is he playing dumb? What do you think?
Well, I mean, quite honestly, it is a rather extraordinary step because, firstly, I mean, the headlines have been that he wanted a jury trial, which in fact is what Virginia Roberts-Giuffre's legal team want. If you actually can picture the horror of this in front of the international media, I mean, there's a film currently showing in London called Nightmare Alley. I think that sums it up extremely well. But the puzzling aspect of this, at least to me, it's rather extraordinary that there are a series in the deposition, there's 71 points that she's made, he's denied 43, and then there are a whole series, apparently, and he's vociferously denied all charges against him, of course, but there's a whole series where he says he's unsure, he doesn't have enough information to confirm or deny. Now, this involves, for example, the infamous photo taken in 2001 with his hand round Virginia Roberts, as she was then, waist. It involves an email that allegedly sent to Ghislaine Maxwell saying that they wanted to have a conversation about Virginia Roberts-Giuffre. It involves questioning the fact that he's a close friend of hers, or indeed the times they've been photographed together, a whole list of these things, some of which, quite honestly, it had been always assumed, and there's photographic evidence, and if you look at the Newsnight interview, you're going to have him put under cross-examination, and it's coming soon, because apparently in London, he is going to be examined by a very formidable legal figure acting for Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, David Boies. So this seems to me an extraordinary development.
It is an extraordinary development. Can I just ask something? I hope this isn't a bit too off topic at all, but I've not heard exactly how Virginia Giuffre is paying for her legal costs. You just mentioned there that there's an eminent lawyer apparently representing her in London and things like that, but I'm just intrigued where she's getting all of this money from, because, I mean, the legal bills... I mean, Prince Andrew reportedly was potentially maybe selling his chalet to help cover his costs, if indeed that's what it was really for. So where's she getting this kind of cash from?
Well, I mean, it's reported that she isn't badly off. I mean, her lawyer is actually based in the United States, but apparently he's going to be visiting Andrew, and there's going to be some form of interrogation. I can only describe it as that, which Andrew is going to find, I would have thought, extremely difficult. As for where Andrew will get the money to fund this, I mean, yes, the chalet apparently the fact it's being sold will bring in some money, and we never know who will be helping one way or another on this particular issue. The palace have taken great care to distance themselves from him, but the point here is, of course, it's the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Well, there hasn't been a senior in a witness stand since Edward VII as Prince of Wales in the 19th century. And in this, of course, he is accused. So my view is still that a settlement could occur, must occur. It occurs in 95% of such cases. And if you think of what will actually happen, it would unfortunately mean a great deal more than money, for so far as we understand at the moment. Virginia Roberts-Giuffre clearly would want some form of apology or admission of guilt. Now, he's not willing to give that. So on that basis, you'd assume it would go on to a trial of some sort or by jury. But if you can actually imagine what that would involve, my own bet at the end of the day is that some form of compromise will be found in some way. But I think it'd be very expensive for him if that is the route eventually that it goes down. The rest is just horrifying.
Yeah, and presumably the royal family obviously are absolutely desperate for him to settle, one would have thought, anyway, with it being the Queen's Platinum Jubilee year. Do you think one of the main reasons why Prince Andrew may well end up settling, or why, sorry, in the latest developments they're saying, well, hang on a minute, we haven't got sufficient information, we can't really have this go to trial, would be because they've seen the way that he performed in front of Emily Maitlis, and they don't really fancy letting him have another crack at it?
Well, I mean, anybody watching that and considering, firstly, as I mentioned, what's coming when there's going to be a deposition, he's going to be cross-examined as part of the discovery process. Secondly, if you just take that further and consider him in a public court, I mean, you simply cannot logically do it, since that interview on Newsnight was so terrifyingly and grotesquely bovine. What I would say, however, is that the least, you mentioned earlier his legal team's attempts to on the technicality of where she's domiciled. Now, whether that has any traction, I don't know. But very, very clearly, their attack is going to be on her character. And if that is the case, then it will get pretty ugly. No question about it.
Well, thank you, Richard Fitzwilliams, royal commentator and journalist, bringing us an update on the Prince Andrew affair and all of the controversies going around with that.
Indeed. Well, look, we're going to just pick up a story here. There's been a lot of clamour in my inbox in the last few days, and on Twitter, actually. Lots of people getting at me on Twitter about how we really need to cover this story, right?
Yes.
So American truckers have joined a convoy started by Canadian truckers protesting a vaccine mandate.
Yes, the Freedom Convoy stretches for 45 miles and is about to descend on the province of Ottawa. A mandatory vaccine requirement for Canadian truckers arriving in the US came into force on January 15th, but as many as 1 in 5 are not vaccinated.
I think it's a really interesting one, that, actually, because Justin Trudeau, even I think it was yesterday, tweeted, so I've just found out I've been exposed to coronavirus and I've got no symptoms, I've tested negative, but in accordance with Ottawa laws or rules, I am now going to self-isolate for 5 days, this, that and the other. And I think a lot of people now are thinking, well, hang on a minute, if you're taking the very softest approach, he's already stood up publicly and said, well, basically, you won't be able to go on and live your normal lives if you don't get a vaccine. You know, I think people have got a massive problem with that. You know, how many people can he turn himself against? Because for me, one of the main ways that he operates is to go, well, these people are all idiots who disagree with me. Well, there's a lot of them.
Well, I mean, I think some sociologists and PhD researchers really need to examine what's been going on in Canada, Australia and New Zealand, because I can't believe it. They are just, at least in my opinion, going off the deep end. And I even saw a development in one of the provinces in Canada where anyone over 12, so as young as 12, who are not vaccinated cannot go anywhere, and they can only go into pharmacies and grocery stores with an escort.
It's just wild.
It is really over 12, so 12-year-olds. Again, it's segregation, it's bullying, it's stigmatization, it's purity politics. What are they thinking? We're talking about Partygate, but you really have to put things into perspective when you see what's going on in some of these other so-called liberal countries, at least.
We were going to rattle through another couple of stories, but we're going to the bulletins very shortly. So I'd just like to stick on with this one, actually, because as you said, look at New Zealand now. Supposedly, this very liberal country. They're banning cigarettes.
It's changed my view of them fundamentally.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Not allowing their own citizens to go back home. Canada, as you rightly pointed out, has done a lot of pretty restrictive, you'd argue, draconian, totalitarian type stuff, right? And then Australia as well. We all know about what's going on in Australia. Now, each to their own. If you are watching this and you think that someone who's not had a vaccine is an idiot, you're perfectly entitled to that view. But do they deserve to have a lot of their rights and freedoms curtailed? Do they deserve, as an entire nation, to not be able to go back and see their own relatives?
Well, one thing I think 5%, something like 5% of people will just not get a vaccine. There's just nothing that you can do. You can pressure them, you can constrain them, And we're just going to have to accept that. I think 95% is a pretty solid rate for any society, to be honest.
Well, I'm inclined to agree, but keep your thoughts coming in to us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and a couple of other little ones as well, including, yes, that's right, trigger warnings on Harry Potter. Who'd have thought it? But that's right, now we're going to go and see the weather.
Hello, good morning. Chilly start to the day, frost in places and a few fog patches, but otherwise plenty of dry and bright weather at first today before it turns more unsettled, especially in the north later on. High pressure still close by, but what we'll see through the next few days is the influence of that high will wane. It will sink to the south. Low pressure will increasingly dominate things further north. And that's why we've got a breezier start to the day for the north and northwest. Some outbreaks of rain here, cloud as well, frost and fog free. But otherwise, fog patches for the next few hours across some southern parts of England into parts of Wales. Eventually they'll lift, and then decent sunny spells for the Midlands, East Anglia, South East England by this afternoon. Otherwise, turning cloudier from the northwest. Temperatures in most places not far from average, but it does turn breezy. In fact, it turns increasingly windy in the north and northwest of Scotland as heavy rain moves in here. And that heavy rain persistent across the northwest Highlands overnight tonight. It will add to about 80 millimetres in some of the wetter spots. Damp for some western hills and coasts elsewhere as the cloud thickens and lowers overnight. But because of the cloud, because of the breeze tonight, well, it's going to be a frost and fog-free start to the weekend. But it will be a grey start with a lot of cloud in the sky. Quite breezy through the day, wet and windy for Scotland, Northern Ireland, as well as Northern England, as this lively feature sinks south, bringing a spell of really quite gusty winds as it pushes through. And then blustery but bright for the northern half of the country, with showers following the main area of rain and cloud. But it stays cloudy in the south, but much milder, 12 or 13 Celsius here. A windy day then to come on Saturday, and wind stays the theme through the next few days. Sunday starts off relatively calm, but it turns increasingly windy, especially in the north later on.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Inman, and Patrick Christys on your TV and your radio. We are here all throughout the show until midday with the big stories and lots of discussions that you care about. So make sure that you get in touch with your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Well, we'll be getting to those throughout the show, of course we will. But first, it's time for your latest news.
Good morning, it's 11:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police have asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the Downing Street events it's investigating. The highly anticipated report into alleged parties during lockdown is yet to be published. Its findings could potentially trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The force isn't calling for any delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in its investigation. Scotland's Secretary of State Ian Murray told GB News it's hard to keep up with Boris Johnson's version of events.
Calls into question the Prime Minister in terms of the ministerial code in line to Parliament. And the very fact the Metropolitan Police are talking about 8 parties. The Prime Minister said there were no parties, then he said he didn't attend parties, then he said he didn't think they were parties but work events, and now we're up to the latest excuse of the Prime Minister being ambushed by his own birthday cake. It's become farcical, and it would be like a funny play if it wasn't so serious for the country.
The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering its delay. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be dropped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Number 10 says there are no plans to scrap the rise. Russia says it does not want war with Ukraine. The country's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, also confirmed the Kremlin is still assessing US proposals to ease tensions. He expects to meet the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in the next couple of weeks. 100,000 Russian troops have amassed on the border with Ukraine in recent weeks, stoking fears of an imminent invasion. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following malicious online attacks in Ukraine. The National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. No current threats have been identified in the UK, but guidance has been updated to ensure businesses stay ahead of potential threats. The Foreign Secretary has defended her decision to use a private plane to fly to Australia, which reportedly cost taxpayers around £500,000. Liz Truss says the government plane is there to make travelling easier for ministers, with the Foreign Office adding the trip was within the rules set by the ministerial code. Critics say it was a grotesque misuse of public money. The UK has pledged a further £97 million of emergency aid for Afghanistan. That's after the government promised to double financial support following the Taliban's takeover last summer. It brings the total to £286 million this financial year. The money is being used to buy food, water and sanitation facilities. COVID restrictions have been eased in Wales. The rule of 6 has been scrapped. People no longer have to social distance and nightclubs can now reopen. COVID passes will still be required in cinemas, theatres and concert halls. Working from home remains part of the advice, but will no longer be a legal requirement. Nearly 50,000 people have now signed a petition to stop a driver from being charged with murder. The man known as Abraham reportedly tried to stop a stabbing in West London by driving into the attacker. He was arrested and has been released on bail while police continue their investigation. The driver's lawyer, Mohammed Akunji, told GB News his client's actions go beyond everyday bravery.
Well, it makes him a person who was acting fully in accordance with the law, which was in the self-defence of another, in fact others. And we say that's quite squarely and quite obviously a person who's a hero, who's put himself in between harm's way, somebody who is effecting a savage attack on people, and he put himself between that person and innocent people.
Over 200 post offices have closed in the last 2 years. That's the equivalent of 2 a week. The research from Citizens Advice found that more than 1,000 of them are deemed temporarily closed, but have actually been shut for more than 2 years. The Post Office says it doesn't think the report reflects the almost 12,000 branches that have been stable for a decade. The government's pledging to make British Sign Language a recognised language. It's hoped a new bill will improve access for deaf people and promote its use during public announcements. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to Patrick and Anaya and to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussion that you care about, so here's what's on the menu.
Well, the pressure is piling on for the Prime Minister, and now we hear that the tax hike on national insurance could be scrapped to help his popularity. But is this too little, too late? We'll discuss.
As the number of recorded rapes and sexual offences in England and Wales hits a record high, we ask, is enough being done to safeguard women?
Yes, and are you facing a crunch on the cost of living? We look at the causes and consequences for the crisis across the country. Also, you may have just seen me look slightly worried at the start, just before we went to the bulletins there, before we went to the news. And that was because we do have a nice surprise for you right at the very end of this show. A very cute surprise.
Indeed.
But that cute surprise managed to find its way into the studio a little bit earlier than we'd anticipated.
Yes, a cute and fluffy surprise, yes. We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, so get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Goodness me, so many of you getting in touch, and there is a lot to get in touch about. Loads of you saying, actually, we need to be very, very careful, just as a society, I suppose, to stop calling Liz Truss's flight a private flight.
Yes, it's a government plane.
It is a government plane, right? It is a government plane, and we should clarify that very much. I mean, that's actually kind of my point. You know, government plane used for government business by government minister. What's the story, really?
Well, this is from Simon, directed to you, Patrick.
Oh, no.
Why are we sending £97 million to Afghanistan? We are skin, our own people need our help. It does my head in.
Well, I mean, I can see that, really, because actually, if you think about it, we have basically handed total control of Afghanistan back over to, you know, our dear friends, the Taliban, the Chinese government and the Russians. And so if we're pumping money into there, I just don't really see how that doesn't end up in the hands of people who wish us harm.
Well, I think that hopefully there will be some procedures and processes to make sure that that gets into the hands of the right people, but I don't know if I fully trust that.
Absolutely. Lots of people as well discussing this Canada/American truckers convoy that's barrelling its way over to Ottawa. And lots of people say they're protesting a federal law. And that this is the right thing to do, and thank you for covering it, actually, because it does not seem to be getting too much coverage on a lot of the old mainstream media, as it were, but
yes.
But there we go.
Yes, lots of people are talking also about the LGBT story.
Yes.
Someone said that they disagree with our analysis that teachers need direction from government. Is Parliament not full of LGBTQ men and women with some unsure about the issue? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, that's it, really, I think. But look, we'll move away from your views now. Keep them coming in. We just wanted to do it early to show that, hey, you know what? We do actually read them out, and so get them coming in, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, and if you disagree with us, please feel free to send your views as well.
Yes, absolutely, but we won't read that. No, OK, we will. Maybe. Anyway, right, a report in The Guardian this morning says that the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is worried that the Prime Minister may not go ahead with the planned national insurance hike, which is worth around 12 billion quid. This comes after the Prime Minister faced even more questions regarding the release of this Sue Gray report, which has been delayed, apparently now, well, until the earliest next week.
Yes, well, the Met Police have also released a statement that has revealed that they will ask for minimal reference to be made to the Cabinet Office report for incidents the police are actively investigating.
More on the fractures in the Tory party and possibly the Cabinet itself. Neighbours aren't supposed to get on, though, are they? But anyway, his former Labour MP, Peter Edwards, thank you very much. Peter, great to have you on the show yet again. Well, look, what do you think about this now? Can Boris Johnson realistically stop this national insurance hike?
He may do. I should just clarify, I haven't been a Labour MP.
I thought that as well. I had a Ron Burgundy moment. Patrick will read anything on the auto cue, right? So yes, apologies for that, but carry on.
Don't worry, you were probably up very early, like me. The problem about the national insurance rise is indecision. And this goes to the point I think everyone in the general public is worried about, that while all this is going on, Boris Johnson is not governing. So clearly, there's this phrase wobbling that's in all the newspapers today, off-the-record briefings that the Prime Minister is wobbling. That's evidently the case. And he's not governing at the moment, I would say. And the worry to me, as a voter and someone that's not part of the government at all, is that there's a vacuum. And because of Boris Johnson's personal weakness over the allegations of parties, there's a vacuum, and it's actually Tory backbenchers, a bit like Theresa May and the tortuous Brexit negotiations. It's Tory backbenchers that are now calling the shots, and if they weren't up in arms, Boris Johnson will be proceeding with the national insurance changes, but he's afraid to do so. So that, to me, is not governing.
Well, I mean, some people might welcome the national insurance changes not going ahead because we are in a cost of living crisis as well. I mean, is this something that the Labour Party would support, hiking national insurance?
Well, I'm not a spokesman for the Labour Party, but personally, I think if you like, the government are caught between the devil and deep blue sea, and you have to understand why. You know, no one likes a tax rise, and it would affect all of us. I do have some concerns about the way the national insurance levy for the NHS waiting list and social care is delivered, because it's going to hit people who are working, like nurses, and it's not going to hit perhaps retired pensioners who might be on a final salary pension scheme and already have significant assets, especially around property and shares. So there is a little bit of an unfairness. It's not a progressive tax change, but you have to look at why we've got a cost of living crisis. And I don't want to give you too much party politics, but if you have energy prices rising, it's because you don't have sufficient gas and electricity infrastructure. If transport's expensive, where I live in London, TfL is not that cheap compared to Paris Metro or New York Metro. It's because there isn't support from central government and so on and so on. So cost of living crises don't just come out of nowhere. They come because of what's going wrong in supply chains or lack of government investment in transport or energy. And while this is a topic for another day, they also come out of big things like Brexit. So cost of living crises do go back to the government. One has to remember that all the time.
Yeah, well, I suppose they do. They do ultimately, I suppose. Yes, indeed. And do you think this is actually, when people are talking about the biggest issues facing them in the country now, I mean, realistically, they after the pandemic, the figures seem to show that there is the cost of living crisis. And do you feel that maybe people in the media and perhaps some politicians, perhaps even some Labour politicians, have been a bit, their news radar's been off. People aren't necessarily that bothered about cake. They would rather the business of government was actually functioning.
Well, this is a bit of a miss that Boris Johnson is under pressure to resign over, I think it's a Colin the Caterpillar cake. And that might bring a smile to our face, but it's not Colin the Caterpillar. It's actually hypocrisy that if you said goodbye to your geriatric mother, your elderly father over Zoom in a care home, and you weren't able to hold their hand as they slipped away, that's the thing that stays with you. And that's so big that goes above and beyond party politics. So it's not about the cake. It's about people partying in one hand as you lose your relatives over Zoom and you can't hold their hand. And I think that's actually what people remember, because we all love our family members and we remember these moments or the absence of them far more than some of the political stories which come and go.
What's worse then? What's worse than what Boris Johnson did? We did see that video of Keir Starmer. Looks like he was having a beer. Maybe he has to go. Or what about those scientists? Mark Drakeford. Yeah. Celebrating Diwali. Then we've had, obviously, scientists, modellers, chief medical officers consistently overestimating figures. And actually, that was one of the things that pushed Boris Johnson in to make stricter restrictions, like what we've seen in care homes or at funerals, etc. I mean, should they all go as well?
So the number of parties that Sue Gray is looking at is 17 alleged government parties. The number of Labour parties, or Labour Party parties, you might say, is 0. Keir Starmer had an alcoholic drink with his dinner, as I often do, and perhaps you do as well. And he did that at the end of a day of work before going to another work meeting. Sue Gray, 17 parties. Labour Party, 0.
OK. Well, what about the chief medical officers and people like that who, really helped shape the rules? If we were being guided by the science, and the science was wrong.
But one is obviously implementing them from a. Yes, of course. And has to take the buck stops with the Prime Minister. We have to acknowledge that. I think.
Yeah. What do you think about that, though? Obviously Professor Ferguson has obviously gone, but for various different reasons. But you got the likes of your Chris Whitties of this world, or the modellers who, do are getting it wrong and influencing policy. Should they go?
But I don't know what your question is. Do you want to get rid of the scientists because they're not right 100% of the time?
Yeah, I think we should get rid of the people who
get rid of the scientists.
Maybe employ better
non-scientists.
I'm not being funny. There doesn't seem to be too much point anymore in a Chris Whitty slideshow because he's normally proven wrong a week later anyway.
What's your alternative?
Get better scientists.
or
get
me,
people that agree with you.
A non-scientist.
Well, we
can actually hear him. Sorry, sorry. I was being shouted at in my ear to stop this, so I will. But there we go. Thank you very much, Peter. Great to have you on the show, Peter Edwards. not a former Labour MP, but indeed the former editor of Labour List. I think it's always good value when Peter's on. So thank you very much, Peter.
Yes, I'm not sure it's very democratic to just sack scientists.
I don't know what...
Just because they disagree with you, but
I don't know. Look, I think potentially, look, if they were influencing policy. But hey, right, we're moving on, and it is actually a shift in tone, moving away from politics there in that sense now.
Yes, well, after a year of multiple high-profile cases of violence against women, the full scale of the crisis has been laid bare in the latest ONS figures. There were 63,000 rapes recorded in the year to September, up 13% from the previous year. In spite of the restrictions affecting people leaving their homes, the safety of women remains an issue without a presentable solution from the government or police.
Well, joining us now from Yes Matters is a feminist, which is a feminist youth work framework group, is the founder of that organisation, Gemma Aitchison. Gemma, thank you very much for coming on to the show again. What do you make of all of this then?
I'm not remotely surprised about it at all. If you look at how low rape convictions are, and you acknowledge that rape is a serial and escalation offence, it never happens just once. They always do it again, and they always do it worse. Then what do we expect? Of course, if we're not convicting rapists, then of course more rape will happen. That's just common sense.
And I mean, do you think that we're doing enough as a society? I mean, record numbers, 13%, despite there being a national lockdown. I mean, do you think we're doing enough? And if not, what do you think we can do?
No, we're not doing enough at all. As I just alluded to, the problem is that we're not convicting it. And, you know, if there are no consequences, then it's going to escalate. And it's not just women, unfortunately, it's girls too. We've seen the Ofsted reports on rape culture in schools and that going on as well. And, you know, there's been surveys done that things like street harassment happen more in the hours of opening and closing times of schools. So it's with girls as well. I think what we need to do, we do have the new Compulsory Sex Education, which is looking at addressing consent and things like that. But I think we also need to look at other things, other influences like pornography, especially, that's becoming increasingly violent. And we need to remember that everyone that has a phone now can create, you know, pornographic things that are without consent as well.
And I mean, you see some of these cases and data regularly now. I mean, we've spoken a lot about on this show and on GBNews that the grooming gangs with thousands of young children and still not a concerted institutional criminal justice effort in order to really get to the root of this. I mean, what is the rationale for not doing anything? You would presume that this would be an issue that politicians and anyone would want to take moral and political leadership on. Why aren't they doing that?
It comes down to gender stereotypes, which are really damaging. This specific gender stereotype is called sexual objectification. So there's lots and lots of studies around this to show that we see women and girls as objects rather than people. And if you see someone as an object, well, objects, chairs, tables, whatever, we break those things all the time. It's not a big deal, we just replace them. So the problem is that we apply that attitude to women and girls, that they matter less. And we see this really, really clearly when we see the phrase, whenever women and girls talk about this thing, we hear the phrase, not all men. And no one's saying that it's all men, but what that implies is, stop talking about this because you're hurting men's feelings, which matter more than what's happening to you guys.
Wow.
All right, well, look, thank you very much for joining us, of course. Gemma Aitchison there from Yes Matters, which is a feminist youth work framework group. And, of course, Gemma is the founder of that organisation.
Yes, well, after the break, we'll be looking at the raging cost of living crisis and asking you, the public, are you struggling to keep the lights on?
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Morning all, happy Friday. Yes, it's 11:23, it's about to be 11:24. Actually, this is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Anaya Falarian on GB News. We're live on your TV and your radio.
Yes, well, new data suggests that nearly 2.5 million families are unable to afford all of their bills after the latest rise to the cost of living. According to consumer watchdog Which, rent, heating, gas and mortgages accumulating for the poorest families has led to a 50% increase of 1.7 million households missing at least one bill payment in the last 4 months.
Well, with us now to look at how families who are struggling can plan for the next couple of months is the economics commentator and founder of the investment platform Regionally, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, who's a regular on the show and got a cat on him.
Oh.
Good morning.
You all right there, Justin?
Meet Betty. Unfortunately, every time the camera goes on, she immediately appears.
Oh.
So I'm sort of stuck. So
Be famous.
Cat noise.
All right, well, that's great stuff. We've got a little surprise for our viewers later, as I keep going on about. A surprise that managed to break its way into the studio earlier as well, which caused a bit of a kerfuffle. But anyway, so talk to me about the cost of living, Justin. I mean, it's getting out of control. What can people do over the next couple of months to help remedy it?
Yep. Well, the first problem we've got, of course, is not just about heating and power, because that's the easy, well, hardly easy, but the most obvious one, because the cap comes off, the price of power we're going to have to start budgeting for is double. Actually, what's going to happen, of course, is you're seeing the cost of production of everything has gone up because the power has to be used to make stuff, and all that stuff will go up. And, of course, making that stuff goes up, so do wage rises. And so you start getting this inflationary spiral. And we haven't really seen this in this country really for about, you have to go back to the 70s when this was really bad. and you got to the period of stagflation, as it was called, a stagnating economy with inflation, although some people got it confused with an inflatable deer, which is not. And the whole point was, therefore, how do you actually try and break that cycle? It's very difficult once inflation gets embedded to actually get it out of the system without causing pain in terms of actual things like pay rise being held back and things like that. But the short-term issues for people is they're going to have to start budgeting very, very carefully, not just for their power and fuel, but also for food as well. And gone are the days when you say, well, just shop around a bit more. I'm afraid everybody's putting their prices up at the moment because everyone wants to be part of the herd. They don't want to be seen as the last company putting up prices, the ones who get the nasty message on the front page of the newspaper.
So easy for the government to do something about the cost of living crisis. That's something that's going to be benefiting millions of people if something was done about it. Why aren't they?
Well, the thing is, what you have to try and structure this in a way that encourages people and doesn't actually make sure you get that one word that runs an economy, confidence. So you have to have confidence that actually the economy is going to grow, I'm going to have a job, and my pay is going to grow commensurately with it. And that's the problem at the moment. Now, the good news is actually, of course, we are setting up a lot of new companies, despite what's happened over the past 2 years. The good news is we've actually got an awful lot of jobs going. It's just that none of them are particularly attractive at the moment. So what the government has to try and do is encourage more investment into those growth areas. And that's primarily things like technology, the small technology hubs and things like that. Because after all, the biggest employer in this country by sector are not the sort of big insurance companies and banks and things like that. It's smaller companies. We are a nation of, as Napoleon referred to us rather rudely, a nation of shopkeepers. Well, there may not be shops anymore, but certainly small businesses. So government can encourage that. What they have to also do is make sure that the taxation is fair. And that old phrase, those with the broadest shoulders can have, well, probably more cats on them, but can actually bear more tax. So putting national insurance up isn't very fair, actually. What it ends up is actually quite often the weaker people having to pay for it. What you should do is have a much more reformed taxation system, because income tax and national insurance are roughly the same, and actually then link it much more according to overall, not just income, but I'm afraid a percentage of wealth as well. That's probably the way to go about it. But that's not going to happen in 2 or 3 months. And of course, this is a medium-term strategy. And of course, governments don't think medium-term. Some would say they don't think at all. And in this particular moment, they probably can't think more than a week ahead because they're waiting for the next announcement to come out. So it's very difficult for a politician. But what they need to do, though, is make sure that it's a fair issue so that people can actually start budgeting properly and give them some flexibility. Just handing money out to people will only be a short-term salve, short-term popular issue, but one that the country can't afford.
OK. Good stuff, Justin. Look, thank you very, very much. It's been great to have you on the show. And indeed, Betty the cat as well, which is lovely. Justin Urquhart-Stewart there, founder of the investment platform regionally, of course. There's Betty. Betty, say goodbye now. OK. Oh, tell you what, Betty loves the camera more than me. But anyway, there we go. I think the camera loves Betty more than me as well, to be fair on that one. I've got my own little energy crisis going on at the minute, my cost of living crisis. So I've not been staying at where I live the last few days. I've just been elsewhere. And I realise I've left the radiator on in my living room, and it's been on for about 5 days, day and night now.
I've done.
Is that going to cost me like a lot?
Yeah,
one radiator in one flat, day and night.
My energy bills has gone up about tenfold.
It's something when you realise that, isn't it?
Sometimes you have these stories and it's only like a few pounds, but actually I think most people now can really see that it's gone up their cost of living. 100%.
Is that really going to do me that? One radiator on 24/7 in a flat?
Yes, for 5 days straight. I think so.
Well, there goes the weekend. There goes the weekend. There goes the weekend.
What I was just saying to Justin, I just think this is such an easy thing for the government to do. Even, yes, Partygate, all of that is horrible, but if they actually just did a massive speech and a raft of policies to deal with the energy crisis, to deal with all of these things that are really, really squeezing the pockets of people, I think that many people will return some goodwill back to the government. But This is.
Well, I'm just going to throw over to a couple of your views. GB Views, gbnews.uk. Sandy in Bridgend. Thank you, Sandy. Great to have you on the show. I'm with Patrick. That's good. You love to see it. There are many factors to be considered when lockdowns and rules were put in place. Many people have been knighted for it, but it appears that only one man is being blamed for it. And that is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, well, Marilyn says cats should be banned from TV.
I don't think cats should be banned from TV. We've just had another message in saying, I love that man and his cat. So, a range of views. Cats, it turns out, are divisive television figures. Who knew? To be fair, that cat was better than the one that James Corden played.
Mary seems very positive about the fact that unlimited visitors, really, seems quite excited as she hasn't been able to see her 91st birthday of her mother for a very long time.
This is it, isn't it? It now does seem like the care sector is catching up with COVID reality, which is brilliant because that's really the one, as you alluded to before, one of the reasons why we really locked down and did all of this stuff was to protect the more vulnerable members of society and was to protect, frankly, a lot of the older members of society. Well, now if we see that they are actually allowing people in, unlimited amounts of people to come in, then what does that show, really? It shows that, really, hopefully, we're out of this thing once and for all.
Yes, and Philip says, British Prestige, 500k, chump change. What's the daily cost of housing on hotels, feeding and all support staff for the 36,000 illegal entries into the country after we gave France a couple of $100 million to supposedly do their job? Wow. Strong words there, Philip.
Strong stuff. Don't you just love the British public? Right, after the break, we will be looking into the protection of the channel. There you go. Very on brand. And asking if we have enough boats to stop these perilous crossings from France. But before that, here's a look at this morning's news.
It's 11:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police have asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the events it's investigating. Her inquiry into alleged Downing Street parties during lockdown was due to be released this week. The force isn't calling for any further delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in the investigation. The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering a U-turn. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be scrapped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Russia says it doesn't want war with Ukraine. The Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirmed proposals by the US to ease tensions are still being assessed. He expects to meet the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the next couple of weeks. The Kremlin also says President Putin will address Russia's security concerns during a phone call with the French president today. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following malicious online attacks in Ukraine. While no current threats have been identified in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. The Foreign Secretary has defended her decision to use a private government jet to fly to Australia, which reportedly cost taxpayers around £500,000. Critics say the move was a grotesque misuse of public money, but Liz Truss says the plane is there to make travelling easier for ministers. COVID restrictions have been lifted in Wales. The rule of 6 has been scrapped. People no longer have to social distance and nightclubs can now reopen. COVID passes will still be required in cinemas, theatres and concert halls. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We're back at the top of the hour.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. It has just gone 10:36. Of course, we are on your TV. We're also on your DAB Plus radio. This is GB News, of course it is, with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Falarin Imam.
Yes, well, a former patrol boat commander warns there is no spare capacity of naval vessels to tackle the number of migrants crossing the Channel. Tom Sharp has told MPs the solution is to curb the crisis, and it's not at sea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of fair enough, that, really. I've got really, really grave reservations about sending the Navy in to try to deal with these migrant boats, namely because I'm not sure what it is that they're going to actually be able to do. And I think the optics and the sights and things like that of there being two Navy warships in the Channel and a little migrant dinghy sailing through the middle of them is not particularly good for this country. But anyway, yes.
Yes, well, Tom Sharp joins us now. Good morning, Tom. You served in the Royal Navy for 27 years, so why are there not enough boats? And what needs to be done?
The first thing that needs to be done is a solution to this needs to be clearly defined by the government, because depending on that solution will affect the resources required to tackle this problem. Let's start with the fact, as Patrick said, the solution to this does actually lie inland. It involves breaking the economic business model through intelligence-led disruption that starves the people who seek to benefit from this, rather like piracy off the Horn of Africa. It's really nothing to do with what happened at sea with the solution. But let's assume that takes years, is very complex, and isn't entirely successful. People are still going to arrive on the beach in France looking to make that final crossing. I think that's a fair assumption. Then you have to decide what to do. Do you want to stop all crossings? Or do you just want to make sure that nobody lands in the UK under their own terms? Because again, that leads you to a slightly different solution. If you want to stop all crossings, then you need an extreme level of cooperation with the French authorities, some of whom may not want to stop those crossings. So it's diplomatically very, very complex. Again, let's assume that can't work, that people will always get in boats, they'll always find a way, particularly if they're desperate, and they'll make the crossing. Now, at this point, the Navy has a role to play. And it has a role to play by coordinating the 20-plus agencies that are involved in this. It has a role in providing intelligence to ensure that these crossings are predictable and their locations are well known. Then it has a role in cohering the surveillance effort, and this is really key. At the moment, the surveillance effort is patchy, and it relies on aircraft that don't persist, and it relies on radars on boats that are moving around at sea level. So it's all suboptimal, and it's not being well coordinated, which is why people are able to slip through undetected. So to me, one of the key things the Navy can do is coordinate a surface picture, which is what they do day in, day out, and ensure that nothing crosses undetected. And then at that point, you meet them on the beach in the UK.
Yeah.
So really the ship, prepare for safety of life.
Well, one of the biggest issues that people have, I've called the RNLI kind of an Uber service for illegal immigrants in the past, and I wouldn't want to see the Navy being a part of that. But they're only an Uber service for, in my opinion, anyway, illegal immigration, if they reach their destination, their desired destination, and stay there. Another option surely has to be deportation. It's one thing going, right, look, I wouldn't feel particularly comfortable not going to I wouldn't feel comfortable at all not going to the aid of a boat in the Channel. I wouldn't feel comfortable just playing ping pong with it, basically, between us and the French until presumably it sinks. I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I would personally be quite comfortable with them coming here, there being holding centres, detention centres, and a proper functional deportation system, because then you're not an Uber service. You're just holding them for a bit before you deliver them to a different destination.
I think that's exactly right. And the Australian model shows that if you process people with 100% accuracy. That's the first point. There's a tremendous deterrent effect to knowing that if you try and make this crossing, you're going to get intercepted either at sea or on the beach. The Australian model shows that eventually the crossings dry up. So that's really important that they're marked, watched across the channel, and then met on arrival, no matter where that is, what time of day, or whatever the weather. And then you're right, the processing then needs to be swift. It needs to be austere. I mean, we essentially, the UK needs a bad tripper advisor review in terms of the way it welcomes these people. If we want to reduce the numbers, they get processed, and then if deportation is the answer, then they're deported. If it's kept in the UK, then that's it. But the key thing is that they're met and that no one arrives, undetected.
Yeah, and we do have to face facts, don't we, really? We are a desirable country, we are a desirable destination, and we've got a very unhelpful neighbour, in a sense, as well, in France. Although I think if I was French, I'd possibly be banging the exact opposite side of the drum, right? So I have to hold my hands up to that. But yeah, I mean, we have to face facts, and this is really the way that it goes. Have we traditionally kind of maybe under-resourced our Navy, perhaps? Could we be using them in conjunction with our military to cut the head off the snake and go after these grooming gangs as well? You know, are we reaping what we've sowed here, perhaps, in a lack of resources sense?
Defence has been under-resourced now for decades. That's no secret. And the Navy, in particular, every single boat and ship it owns is in use. It's either on operations or working up to be on operations. So the person who has control of the naval planning process will be looking at this with a degree of angst, because if you want to take Navy ships off task to do this task in the Channel, the very first question you've got to ask is, what would you like us to stop doing? And that's just a reality of our resources being wafer thin. And same with the RAF. If they were to use airborne assets, they have some fantastic bits of kit to do that, but they're in use. So again, what do you want them to stop doing? So yes, to an extent, this is a resource issue. And if we're to step up our efforts on the UK coast, as I've described, in other words, the surveillance improves using standing surveillance methods along the coastline, and then every single migrant is met on the beach. I mean, that could be tens of thousands as predicted in the summer. So resources inland are going to have to go up considerably if my plans to work, and that brings in perhaps the army. I don't know what the plans will say.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Tom Sharp, who served in the Royal Navy for 27 years. I mean, Patrick, I don't agree with your take on the RNLI. I think is a bare minimum that if people are struggling in the Channel, that we protect them as we would hope would be done for us too. And so I strongly disagree.
Well, no, I just think if we had a deportation system as well that worked, potentially then we would be in a different situation. But we're moving away now. We're veering away from all of that because Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has been forced to defend her decision to fly via government jet to Australia, which cost the taxpayer an estimated £500,000. The Foreign Office said that the use of the plane was within the rules set by the Ministerial Code, and Truss obviously insisted the trip was value for money. But for more on this now, there's a gentleman here who I've only ever seen at Gatwick Airport. And now he's here. He's right here in the studio. It's travel journalist Simon Calder joins us. How are you?
Well, Patrick, I parked my helicopter on the roof. Is that all right?
That's absolutely fine. Absolutely.
I cycled in as normal. It's very nice to see you both. It's very nice to be able to disagree respectfully.
Indeed.
Yes.
Well, tell us, would it be cheaper to travel private jet to Australia, do you think?
No, look, I can come up with some circumstances where it would be absolutely a really good idea, but not on this occasion. So every country has its own private jet. You'll be aware, of course, of Air Force One in the US, which, funnily enough, isn't a specific plane. It's whichever plane the president happens to be on. But France has got a very nice one. Germany's actually got the best one, top-of-the-range Airbus A350. So by comparison, we're a little bit shabby. However, they are useful for trips like yesterday. The Prime Minister went to lovely Anglesey in northwest Wales. Now, if anybody has ever tried to get there by train, it's a sort of 4.5-hour journey. And if you're at the head of an important organisation like the UK government, you can make a case for flying there. Maybe not on a big Airbus A321, which is what he did, which is a plane, when you fly on EasyJet, there's 235 seats. And on his trip, presumably like Liz Truss, there were 14.
Yeah.
So, but you can kind of make a case for it, and there will always be cases when top people need to fly. But she could have flown on Qantas, a very good airline, with flatbeds in business class. She would have saved a couple of hours each way because they don't need to refuel so often.
Yeah.
But instead, she thought she would cost us £500,000 and generate 500 tonnes of CO2.
Well, what do you say to those who say, the UK is meant to be a global power, sixth largest economy in the world, that we want to project an image of prosperity and strength, particularly for our ministers and leaders and so on. And so actually 500 is chicken change.
It is. And we just signed an AUKUS deal with them, we've signed all these things. They would be a bit affronted if we turned up on Ryanair,
Well, the day when Ryanair flies to Australia, Patrick, you can be on the first flight.
Happily.
OK, no, I mean, it would have been completely respectful to fly in on a very good, safe Boeing 787 operated by Qantas, one of the world's leading airlines. I think everyone would have been happy with that. I mean, you had this ludicrous thing where they had a short hop from Sydney to Adelaide, and they were 17 minutes behind a Qantas plane making exactly the same journey. And it just, they say absolutely, as you point out, under the ministerial code, it will be allowed. And all we can do is say we'll look forward to seeing the report when it comes out because they have to list all their jaunts and why it went ahead. But it's uncovered quite a lot. Liz Truss was off yesterday too. Beautiful Belfast. She flew on a private jet and this wasn't a government one. This was actually a kind of handing over tens of thousands of pounds one, flying from Biggin Hill in Kent. Lovely private jet terminal there. Up to Belfast City. She left 9 minutes before the British Airways flight from London City Airport, and she arrived 3 minutes after it. But she was on an 85-seater jet. There we are.
Wow.
That's what you get when you.
You don't think there's any security risks, like in terms of it being private in that sense of there not being any other normal people?
I've had lots of conversations, as you would imagine, with the Foreign Office over this. And they say, you're sitting on a plane, you've got loads of people. I mean, frankly, with the greatest respect, you've no idea who you're sitting next to.
No, absolutely, yes. You weren't expecting this right now.
And therefore, you can't have confidential conversations. Well, lots of leaders of industry have presumably confidential conversations when they're doing that. And the trouble is, with that line of argument, well, first of all, I've noticed that lots of confidential conversations take place within government, and some of them appear in the media. I don't know how that happens. Must be because people are on planes. And the other thing is, if you're going to take that line, every single journey is going to have to be a private jet.
That's true. Can I just say, maybe it's more of a global problem as well? You mentioned that some of the countries in rather night jazz. Of course, Jean-Claude Juncker, remember him? Yeah. Gosh, remember Juncker? He used private jets for almost half of his official visits, and that was in 2018.
Yes.
One single trip cost £32,000. I believe he was flying from Brussels to Turkey.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
so it's a global
thing. Absolutely, and indefensible. European Commission does it. European nations do it. And Britain wants to be part of that. I mean, we're paying £37 million a year anyway for this plane to sit on the ground. And what Liz Truss was trying to say was, well, it's a government plane, it's there, we're going to use it. Trouble is, it costs a fortune just to sit on the ground. When you start using it, the costs go through the roof. 150 tonnes of fuel. So that's going to be, you're talking there about well over £100,000 just for the cost of the fuel. You've got a crew, because they had to have 2 sets of crew because it was a long old way. I mean, the costs just go through the roof. And 14 people travelled. They could all have gone very nice business class on Qantas, paying absolutely top whack for £100,000, so 1/5 of this.
There we go. Simon, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming into the studio. Great to actually meet you in person as well. But fantastic. So, travel journalist Simon Calder, of course, whizzing you through that private jet gate. Now, when will it end? When will it end? Well, with 1 week to go until the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, Team GB athletes are looking to prove that they can be amongst the best in the world. But our South East of England reporter, Ellie Costello, has got her skates on herself. She's at the Riverside Ice Centre in Chelmsford to see how some of the younger people there are getting on.
Good morning, I'm here at Riverside Ice Rink today in Chelmsford where there's so much excitement in the rink. It's 1 week to go until the Winter Olympics kick off in Beijing. And look around this ice rink, there are so many young skaters here practicing like they do every single morning. Let's go and chat to one of them now. This is Macy, she's 10 years old. I'm going to try and spin into you, Macy. I might fall over. Woo, here we go. Macy, you are just 10 years old and look at you, you've got a very professional looking outfit on. How long have you been skating for?
3 years.
3 years.
And that includes lockdown.
That includes lockdown, so that's pretty amazing. So what, you weren't skating for about 18 months?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. And you've been to loads of competitions, haven't you, in that time?
Yeah.
Which ones have you been to?
I've been to Skate London, Skate Southern, Young Stars, Tayside, and Oxford.
So loads of competitions. You've probably only been skating for about 18 months. What do you love about skating so much?
Everything, especially spins, jumps and competitions.
Ah, you like all the dangerous stuff. So we are here today, Macy, because it's 1 week to go until the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Are you going to be watching the Winter Olympics? Are you excited?
Yes, I'm very excited to watch the Russians.
The Russians, not Team GB.
And of course, Natasha McKay.
Oh, there you go, there you go. She saved it last minute. And do you want to be in the Olympics one day? Are you hoping maybe in 4 or 8 or 12 years' time this could be you?
Yes.
I think you might have what it takes. Well, let's speak to someone who might know. This is Macy's coach, Chloe. Chloe, I'm going to fall over here, so I'm just going to hang on to you.
Right.
So, what makes a perfect ice skater? What kind of ingredients does a person need?
So you need a bit of elegance, a bit of perseverance and hard work, really. It's quite a tough sport. A lot of ballet involved as well as, sport. Yeah.
And dedication as well. I mean, Macy was here at 6 o'clock this morning. I mean, what kind of hours are we talking about here in a week?
So to get quiet ice, you really do need to get here for 6 o'clock in the morning before school, and then a lot of people train after school as well. So, yeah, a lot of commitment.
Yeah, absolute commitment. So, does Macy have what it takes, do you think?
Absolutely. She's so hard-working. She is here all the time. Tries so hard. I can't ask more of her.
Well, you two are fabulous. Thank you so much for talking to me this morning. And you're going to show me the best of what you've got right now, haven't you? So take it away. So impressive. That is the best of British. I think we're going to be seeing you both at the Olympics very soon. Back to you in the studio.
Well, are you a pet owner? And did you choose your four-legged friend because of its smaller body size? Well, here's Bob, a cockapoo, who was chosen because of his small frame and being hypoallergenic. And according to new research, the reason it's possible to opt for toy and smaller breeds lies with a genetic mutation that first emerged in wolves 54,000 years ago, long before humans started breeding cute canines. Well, look at this gorgeous
Good boy, absolutely. Well, there we go. We thought, what better way to end the weekend? End the week with lovely Bob here. So basically, just to whiz you through as well, of course, one thing that happened with me was one of my friends was looking after this dog. They've gone away. They've gone areas. They've gone away, and so he's been at doggy he's been at doggy daycare all week, but then doggy daycare was closed today, so I had no choice but to bring him into the studio. And he's been. I'll tell you what. He's gone down very, very well with a lot of our members of staff. That's for sure. Bobkin, how are you? You good? Yeah, so we were going to mic him up, but then we thought you just can't trust what he's going to say next.
Oh, I love Sir Patrick.
Oh, there we go. Bob's a little bit camera shy, isn't he? But we just thought, what a way to finish the week. I'm just gonna stay here and stroke Bob while you read out some GB views.
He's so cute. No, but how cute is it that he's camera shy? He doesn't want to. He doesn't want his.
Oh, Bobby.
Well, just before we end, we will. Get into GB views.
Bob, you don't turn your back on the country, you let your country turn its back on you. Okay. Come on, Bobby. Oh, bless you. But anyway, yes, he's been very, very well looked after here at GB News, that's for sure.
Oh dear.
And, people are madly in love with Bob.
He doesn't like the camera.
Okay, well, we'll take Bob out, shall we? There we go. All right, and we'll finish with some of your wonderful views, people.
Oh, hopefully we haven't upset him.
Oh, that was chaos. Right, okay.
Well, Simon says, wow, lovely dog. Really cute.
Lovely dog,
And someone
yes.
said, animal therapy. Yes, love a bit of animal therapy.
Love a bit of animal therapy, yes.
Yeah.
And, I must say, I possibly, on reflection, should have run it by my bosses, really, I suppose, that I was going to be bringing a cockapoo into work today. It's not what normally happens here at GB News, but I thought, if I say no, I'm going to have to pay through the nose for another day of doggy daycare, and I just can't have that. So, yes,
He's gorgeous. We're a nation of dog lovers, as they say.
All right, well, look, thank you. I think that's a way to finish what's been a relatively chaotic week.
Yes, absolutely. And don't forget to tune in to the discussion 3 to 4 p.m. on GB News. That's my show. Check it out this Sunday.
Yes, absolutely. What time was it again?
3 to 4 p.m. The discussion.
There you go. Right, don't miss that. But don't go away right now as well, because up next is the briefing with the wonderful Isabel Oakeshott. But right now, we're going to do the weather.
Hello again. It's been a pretty quiet January so far, but our weather is set to turn more unsettled as we head through this weekend. Through Friday, still got some sunshine around, but those skies clouding over and those winds turning stronger. And that's because this high pressure slides away and we see these tightening isobars starting to push their way in. So a wetter and windier picture of weather to come as we go through the next couple of days. Out there at the moment, though, we've got plenty of sunshine across eastern areas. The sky is turning a little bit hazy through the afternoon as we see that cloud pushing in from the west. But elsewhere, rather cloudy through much of the afternoon with some outbreaks of rain pushing in across the west of Scotland. The wind's beginning to pick up here, and that's a sign of things to come. Temperatures on the mild side, though, 11s and 12s under the cloud, 9 or 10 where we've got sunnier skies and some sunshine around through much of the day. Now, as we go through this evening and overnight, skies turn cloudy for most places. Some drizzly bits of pieces of rain in western areas, but that wet weather and windier weather becomes more dominant across Scotland. So we are going to see some pretty gusty conditions, a wind warning in force across Scotland. We'll see some pretty squally gales to push their way through with that heavy rain, but it does stay mild overnight. As we go into Saturday, then, that's when the winds really start to ramp up. We'll see some very gusty conditions for western Scotland through the central belt over towards eastern Scotland as well. Could be some damaging gusts of winds here. Stay tuned to the latest forecast. This weather front drives its way southwards. We'll see brighter and blustery conditions following in behind, some wintry showers over higher ground and feeling quite cool with those strong and gusty winds, even though temperatures may get to 13 across the far south. That cloud and rain eventually clears the far southwest of Cornwall as we go through the early hours, and then clearer skies following on behind means that as those winds ease, we will see a touch of frost into Sunday. But the weather is set to turn yet more unsettled again on Sunday with another deep area of low pressure pushing in. Bye-bye for now.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott. Well, we're all still waiting for that Sue Gray report into parties, but has the police investigation taken the heat out of it? We'll speak to a Tory MP accused of being a plotter. Also, I'm going to be sitting down with Dame Joanna Lumley to talk about her passion for animal welfare, in particular farm animal welfare, and hear why she thinks mental health complaints have got totally out of control. All that coming up, but first, the news.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police have asked Sue Gray to make minimal reference to the Downing Street events it's investigating. The highly anticipated report into alleged parties during lockdown is yet to be published. Its findings could potentially trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. The force isn't calling for any delays, but confirmed it's in contact with the Cabinet Office to avoid any prejudice in its investigation. Scotland's Secretary of State Ian Murray told GB News it's hard to keep up with Boris Johnson's version of events.
It calls into question the Prime Minister in terms of the ministerial code in line to Parliament. And the very fact the Metropolitan Police are talking about 8 parties. The Prime Minister said there were no parties, then he said he didn't attend parties, then he said he didn't think they were parties but work events, and now we're up to the latest excuse of the Prime Minister being ambushed by his own birthday cake. It's become farcical, and it would be like a funny play if it wasn't so serious for the country.
The national insurance hike is going ahead, according to government ministers, despite reports the Prime Minister is considering its delay. Conservative MPs are among the voices calling for the increase in April to be dropped as families struggle because of the rise in the cost of living. Number 10 says there are no plans to scrap the rise. Russia says it does not want war with Ukraine, but the country won't allow its interests to be ignored. The country's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, also confirmed the Kremlin is still assessing US proposals to ease tensions. He expects to meet the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in the next couple of weeks. 100,000 Russian troops have amassed on the border with Ukraine in recent weeks, stoking fears of an imminent invasion. British companies are being warned to strengthen their digital defences following malicious online attacks in Ukraine. The National Cybersecurity Centre says the incidents bear the hallmarks of Russian activity. No current threats have been identified in the UK, but guidance has been updated to ensure businesses stay ahead of potential threats. The UK has pledged a further £97 million of emergency aid for Afghanistan. That's after the government promised to double financial support following the Taliban's takeover last summer. It brings the total to £286 million this financial year. The money's being used to buy food, water and sanitation facilities. The parents of an 8-week-old baby who died with more than 60 broken bones are being sentenced at London Crown Court. 24-year-old Naomi Johnson and 26-year-old Benjamin O'Shea have been found guilty of causing or allowing the death of Amina Faye Johnson. She died in Southwark after suffering 41 fractures to her ribs and 24 fractures to her limbs. The pair claimed paramedics caused the injuries to their daughter. Nearly 50,000 people have now signed a petition to stop a driver from being charged with murder. The man, known as Abraham, reportedly tried to stop a stabbing in West London by driving into the attacker. He was arrested and has been released on bail while police continue their investigation. The driver's lawyer, Mohammed Akunji, told GB News his client's actions go beyond everyday bravery.
Well, it makes him a person who was acting fully in accordance with the law, which was in the self-defence of another, in fact, others. And we say that's quite squarely and quite obviously a person who's a hero, who's put himself in between harm's way, somebody who is effecting a savage attack on people, and he put himself between that person and innocent people.
Over 200 post offices have closed in the last 2 years. That's the equivalent of 2 a week. The research from Citizens Advice found that more than 1,000 of them are deemed temporarily closed but have actually been shut for more than 2 years. The Post Office says it doesn't think the report reflects the almost 12,000 branches that have been stable for a decade. The government's pledging to make British Sign Language a recognised language. It's hoped a new bill will improve access for deaf people and promote its use during public announcements. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it's back to the briefing with Isabel Oakeshott.
Hello and welcome. Coming up this hour on The Briefing, waiting for Sue Gray, but will she now actually publish her report into parties at all, given the Met Police investigation? We're going to be speaking to Tory MP Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, alleged to be behind a plot to dethrone the Prime Minister, but he says reports of his involvement are inaccurate. We'll hear why. And I sit down with Dame Joanna Lumley to hear her view on animal welfare, the Queen, and how mental health complaining has got out of control. All that's coming up. Now, has Boris Johnson outplayed his critics? In an extraordinary development this morning, the Metropolitan Police issued a statement asking for Sue Gray's reports into allegations of lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street, only to make minimal reference to the events the police are investigating. Well, sorry, what? Let me translate that for you. Police Chief Cressida Dick, whose contract was recently renewed by none other than the Prime Minister, doesn't want the senior civil servant charged with an inquiry into rule-breaking social events in Number 10 to publish any details of her findings. Why? Because, and I quote, it might prejudice their investigation. Why does that matter? Well, because it gets Boris Johnson off the hook until the police have finished their research, which could frankly take anything up to a year, and that's if they're in a hurry. In other words, very conveniently for Downing Street, this has been kicked into the long grass. Well, bravo, Prime Minister. It seems like the woman you personally kept at the top of the Met Police, against much advice, I must say, has done you a big, fat favour. For the seeable future, no details of the official investigation into your lockdown-breaking activities will be published. You can shut everybody up by saying it's all in the hands of the police, and you can and will crack on as if it's business as usual. This is all terribly convenient, isn't it? Well, look, first, let's get one thing straight. This kind of instruction from the police is not normal. I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I have never heard of the media not being allowed to report ongoing investigations, except perhaps if somebody has been taken hostage. Indeed, police are always asking the press to help with them by reporting on these ongoing inquiries. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no such thing as prejudicing an investigation. Reporting of known facts only has to stop, in the normal scheme of things, once somebody has been charged. So what the hell is this? And did you, Prime Minister, put Dame Cressida Dick up to it? In my personal opinion, and others may disagree, they may have a more generous interpretation, but I think you, Prime Minister, or your lackeys, did just that. The question is whether it will save your skin. Well, our political correspondent Tom Harwood has just come out of the Downing Street briefing and should be able to update us on the latest developments. Good morning, Tom. What was the atmosphere like in the Downing Street briefing for the lobby journalists this morning?
Well, there was a lot of confusion, quite frankly, a lot of open questions, not that many answers. Will the Prime Minister, what is the Prime Minister expecting? Will the report come out next week? Well, that's a matter for the investigations team, entirely separate from Number 10. Has Number 10 been speaking to the Met, been speaking to the investigations team? As far as they're aware, no. The investigations team and the Met have been doing independent talks. And was Downing Street even aware that this announcement from the Met was going to come out this morning? By all accounts, they were blindsided by this announcement. So a Number 10 professing cluelessness, an independent investigation and a Metropolitan Police that have been speaking over the last few days, and more questions than answers, quite frankly. Will this report come out next week? We don't know. Will it come out in two parts, one before the police report and one after the police investigation? We don't know. And what will the Prime Minister do if only a bit of it comes out and then a later bit? Will he go to the Commons twice? Well, we don't know that either. Quite frankly, more questions than answers this morning.
So, just to be clear, Tom, then Number 10 are disavowing any knowledge of the Met Police decision to put this statement out, saying, please don't publish your report, or rather, please don't publish anything that's really pertinent to our investigation, which, frankly, is the whole report. Number 10 are insisting that had nothing to do with them.
I'm going to try a speed test on this on my computer. That's right. Number 10 are saying they haven't had these independent conversations with the Met. All the conversations, as far as what Number 10 was saying, all the conversations were between the investigations team, so Sue Gray's team, which is independent of Number 10, that's a body in the Cabinet Office, and the Metropolitan Police. Number 10 were saying they were not involved in discussions with the Met this week. And even there was the suggestion that they did not know that such a statement, as we saw at around 7 a.m. this morning, they were, as far as they were aware, unaware that that was coming along.
Tom, talk to me about trust at these lobby briefings. I was a member of the lobby for very many years, and it was always the case that the Prime Minister's spokesman was seen as pretty unimpeachable. What came from the Prime Minister's spokesman should be taken as utter truth and fact. But the events of the last few weeks and months may well have undermined that. Has there been any kind of corrosion of trust, would you say? And from the point of view of our viewers, should they take anything that Number 10 is saying now with a pinch of salt, or do you feel that the truth is being told here? Well, I hope we haven't lost Tom, but if we have lost Tom, I will fill in just by talking to you about that issue of trust in these lobby briefings.
I think I'm still here, if you can hear me.
Thank you, Tom. I think we've got you back there.
Well, there's
just was asking you about trust.
I think there might be a slight delay, so I'll plough on anyway.
Thank you.
As far as we're aware, Number 10 and their spokespeople use a funny sort of language. If they want to, we've heard of the non-denial denials before. Are you going to do this? Well, we have no plans to do this. In sort of journalist speak, that means they may well be doing that thing, if you see what I mean. So there's ways and words that are used that couldn't ever be described as outright mistruths, but may be slightly misleading depending on how you interpret that. There are also questions whereby the Number 10 and the Number 10 operations simply stonewall. They don't want to answer certain questions. They refer back to previous statements. There was a long discussion as to whether or not there was cake at that 19th of June birthday party in 2020 in the Cabinet Room. Was there cake? Well, I'm afraid we can't comment while an ongoing investigation is going on. It sort of boggles the mind that we can't have really straight answers to questions like these. But then there are other questions that we ask. For example, around this national insurance hike. Will the national insurance hike go ahead or not? Well, there are no plans to abandon it. No plans to abandon it is not the same thing as saying it will definitely go ahead. So there are ways and words that are used that if you sort of read between the lines, you can get more of a hint. But yes, certainly a great deal of ambiguity to some of these questions, and potentially a bit of a knowing smile from those answering and those asking, I should say, and potentially not all that great of a trustful relationship that exists right now.
Thank you very much, Tom Harwood, and sorry about the slight technical hitches there. Well, I'm joined now by Tony Diver. He's a reporter on The Telegraph, and he is the one who broke the story about Downing Street partying on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. Thank you for joining us, Tony. It was a great scoop that you